One race from the same place that make the same trip on the same ship. So we must push one common intention. It's for a better life in the region. For we woman and we children. That must be the ambition of the Caribbean and the Caribbean and the Caribbean.
Poor Man's Cry. I hope you enjoyed this song. It comes from the heart. Every day I keep hearing people talking about the state of the world daily. Some wondering what is happening. Where do we go from here? No one could foresee. Some say it's the fault of the leaders. They say they're just like oppressors. Some say mismanagement from the damn faulty government. But while they're blaming and blaming, I see more people suffering. Where do we go and how shall we move on? So answer these questions. Why must there be retrenchment among the poor ones who working for few cents to take home to their families? Would someone please tell me why one man could have so much money while the next one day he hungry, trying to survive in his country? And I hear that poor man's cry. How come? Tell me, how come? Oh, how come our country's just going down, down, down? How come? Tell me, how come? Oh, how come this whole world just going down, down, down? Every day I walk about, I look east, west, north and south, and what I see in my mind there is still a doubt. I see vagrancy increase, drugs that wouldn't cease, robberies perform just like in the movie. Some say it's the youths of the nation. They say it's total frustration. Some say they're bad, they're a disgrace, and it's so sad. But while they're blaming and blaming, I hear the youth saying something they can't get over. The qualifications are like a joke. So answer more questions. Why drugs take over the city? You know we can't find no cure for me, and we can't find no cure that I could see. Would someone please tell me why food prices keep rising, nurses and teachers keep on resigning? You know abroad, most of them running. And I hear that poor man's cry. How come? Tell me how come? Oh, How come our country's just going down, down, down? How come? Tell me, how come? Oh, how come our country's just going down, down, down? Every day I keep praying, night and morning, that things got changed just to end this suffering. I hear Satan say has to be better, and who not mad say they rather dead. Cause living here, they find it is too damn dread. Some people turn big refugee. They say they can't live in the country. Gone to Canada, Brooklyn, Washington, D.C. But while they're blaming and blaming, I see more hard times coming. I see more problems facing me and we children. So answer more questions. Why? When you're looking at Parliament, you have to feel it's a movie that you rent. The behavior is so indecent. Would someone please tell me why? Every corner that I meet, I see single mothers on the street begging for something for their children to eat. And I hear that poor man's cry, how come? Tell me, how come? Oh, how come our country's just going down, down, down? How come? Tell me, how come? Oh, how come this whole world just going down, down, down? How come? Stop this suffering. How come? Stop all this grunting. How come? Just tell me how come? How come? Stop the promising. How come? Stop all the lying. How come? Just tell me how come? How come? Let's join in unity to build back our country. How come? Just tell me how come? How come? How come? Oh, how come? Just tell me how come? Good.
Oh, yes, welcome to our Monday edition of Politics 101, the Open Word podcast with Professor Clive Thomas. Starting off with Easlyn Orr from Tobago, that calypso, how come, how come, how come? Backed by popular request, we played it last Friday, and so many people ask for links to it and ask that we play it. How come? And it fits in with our focus on poverty. Our focus on poverty, the focus of Politics 101, an extension of the focus of the Working People's Alliance, the WPA. We have decided that we would take on the issue of poverty because we feel in an era of plenty, so many things can be done. So many things ought to be done. So many things should be done with the oil wealth, what Professor Thomas called the windfall. So many things can be done, and people are championing causes. Well, we in the Working People's Alliance have decided that we are going to focus on poverty. Not exclusively, but we feel that that is going to be the area where we start. Because we think if we can tackle poverty, if we can eradicate poverty, we open possibilities for other things. Of course, we are paying attention also to the transition from fossil fuel to renewables. We have called on the government to begin to invest in research on renewables so that we can begin to make that transition. And for us, it's not idle talk. We want to see the policies take some of that money, invest it in eradicating poverty, take some of it, invest it in serious research so that we can make the transition from fossil fuel to renewables. And we have great possibilities for renewables. We're also arguing to situate our development again within the larger context of Caribbean development. We ought to take a regional approach. We argue that development ought to be that balance between the national, as in Guyana, and our larger regional approach. Those are three of the things that we have decided that we're going to focus on. There are other things that we are going to pay attention to, but our major focus, we start with poverty. How come mothers are still on the side of the street begging? We do not doubt that our movement to a petrol state has really transformed our country. And we argue that that transformation takes place not because of the government, but despite what the government has done. We are not denying that. We are not deniers in that sense. But what we are saying is, how do you manage? How do you manage? How do you manage the resources that are coming? And that's where we are taking on the government. We're not deniers. If the president wants to go and tell the world that Guyana is changing, he has every right to say that, because it is true. Guyana is changing. It is when he goes and to say that the changes are taking place because of what he and his government is doing, that's where we are going to take him on. Because that's what we are interested in. When we look at the budget, we look to see, is the budget, is one of its objectives, is it the eradication of poverty? The poor man's cry, as Sister Evelyn Orr says in that calypso. The poor man's cry. How come? How come? The poor people are asking, how come? How come? That's the question they're asking. How come? And the government has a responsibility to answer that question, not with rhetoric, but with policies. And those policies have to arise out of a larger vision. And we in the WPA are prepared to answer those questions, at least attempt to. How come? How come? And we're going to explain to the ordinary people how come this is happening, and we're going to put forward policies to answer those questions. That's what we're about. Serious people have to be about seriousness. And if the government doesn't want to be serious, then we have to be serious. Governments by their nature don't move in progressive directions. government move in progressive directions when the people and the representatives of the people, the genuine representatives of the people, and by genuine I mean those who think about these things and come up with solutions to them. It's our responsibility to push the government and push the society in that direction. We are not going to allow this opportunity, this windfall, to push us further down into the dungeons. That's the choice we have. Are we going to go down that slippery slope of going back into the dungeons, or are we going to use this windfall to lift ourselves and finally overcome the debilitating obstacles that have been put in our way by our sordid history of bondage? A young man, young Ohini Kuama, one of our brothers, our stalwarts, who was viciously, who was murdered in 1978. His son was now older. He was on a program, and he said that he grew up as a child watching the leaders of the WPA in the 1970s and 80s. And what he concluded as a child, that these were men and women on a mission. And it hit me when he said that. Indeed, we have always been on a mission, and we continue to be on that mission. And our mission today is reflected in our determination not to allow this opportunity to slip by without correcting some of the problems we have been grappling with for the last 70 years, from decolonization to the present. Good evening and welcome to Politics 101. Whether you're joining us from Guyana, whether you're joining us from the wider Caribbean or North America, or Europe, or South America, or further afield, welcome to Politics 101. As we say on this program all the time, we love you. We love you all because we are not able to do this without you. And it is remarkable that you all come on here 5 days a week, 7 days a week. They talk about the attention span of ordinary people, you know. The attention span is short because we have all these things on social media. But we have a critical mass of people who are here every evening, not just for this program, but for other programs. I think that's a remarkable movement in our society. You see, the revolution manifests itself. In the old days, we went to the street corners. We didn't have the internet, and we didn't have all these technological innovations. We went to the street corners to take our messages. We were shut out from the radio, and there was no television back then in Guyana. So we had to go to the street corners. Today, we are still shut out from the national television and national radio and so on. But this new technology puts us in touch with you all every day. And I'm saying it is remarkable. You all don't come one day and don't come back the next 6 days. You all come here every day. This evening, we're going to answer a couple of questions. The projection is that by 2050, we're going to be moving from oil and fossil fuels, as they call them, to more renewable energy. Is that schedule still in play? You see, we got to follow these things. And then the second question we want to answer is whether ExxonMobil, this is a big company, an international company. And we're going to answer the question tonight of whether we are being caught up. Is Guyana locked into ExxonMobil's information warfare on global climate transition policies? We have a cadre of activists in the country who are taking on Exxon on the question of climate change and the environment. And as I have said here over and over, God bless them, because that's important work. And we've seen the Guyana government through the EPA getting involved. Our courts have become involved. And we are going to ask the question whether ExxonMobil's information warfare on global climate change policies, whether we are becoming locked into it. In other words, is ExxonMobil so overpowering and all the machinations, all the things that I mentioned just now, the courts getting involved, or activists, taking on Exxon on the question of insurance and all of that stuff, and Exxon pushing back. And are we becoming locked into ExxonMobil's warfare? I think there's a given that ExxonMobil maybe doesn't have the world's best portfolio when it comes to supporting the climate change agenda of the United Nations and other international bodies. So we're going to try to answer those two questions, and who better to help us to answer those questions? Professor Clive Thomas, as usual, spends his time thinking about these and other subjects. Welcome, in case you're just joining us. Yes, Monday night edition of Politics 101. Let's bring in Professor Thomas and get going. Professor Thomas, good evening.
Good evening, David.
As the Calypsonian is one to do, they ask questions.
How come?
How come? How come? How come? And I'm going to ask the general question. How come after what is it now? 4 years, 5 years, going on to 5 years since first oil, how come we are still seeing clear manifestation of poverty in our society? How come, Professor Thomas?
I think the problem is not only that we're not seeing clear manifestations of how we're going to directly address that, but I think that the opportunities for doing it are slipping from us. So that what in fact we're losing is the most precious commodity of all, time. Because the longer we take to get rid of this poverty, and one can argue that over time, long time, the poverty will go just because the massive finds with the oil are so large that long way down the line, sometime in the 1940s, in the 2040s, might solve the problem. But I think the problem is solvable within half of a decade. And that is why it is so urgent for us to do that. It's a necessary precondition for really being put in a position where we can maximize the benefits for Guyana and the Caribbean region of the oil find or the oil windfall that we have stumbled upon. by sheer happenstance. And therefore,
Here,
that has become adopted by the WPA and the mission of the party. And I am very happy to be in a position to supply them with information that might be useful in making that a reality. Of course, there has been over historical periods several different mechanisms that have been introduced to try to address the question of poverty when you become a petrol state. I have a series of articles coming out in the next few months which identify 6 of these mechanisms and really make a sort of analysis of each of them. And I arrive and sustain my initial conclusion that without a universal basic income system or mechanism, we won't be able to do it quick enough. I think all the other mechanisms that have been tried over the historical period, like giving jobs to the state employees, for state employees to grow, all these other types of mechanisms ultimately fail because they don't speak to the fundamental asymmetry of the fact that the system of oil, the global mechanisms with which oil is produced, will always be asymmetric. Generated revenues to governments, governments then have to spend it. It does not generate revenues directly for the people. So it has to be mediated by a government. And unless a government takes on the inevitable requirement to make sure that the transmission goes directly to the people, we will not be able to eradicate poverty quickly. What it fosters is then an asymmetry in the growth and distribution of income and wealth in the society. And we can already see some of that happening in Ghana. We can see the wild disparities between those who have and those who have not, and they're growing. Even though those who have not, they feel that this situation is being improved slowly. Those who have are growing at a phenomenal rate. You can have a 60% growth in GDP and don't see, without controls by the government, a wide distribution, a wider and wider distribution, maldistribution of income and wealth in the country. And that is what we're writing out now. So what some people take for granted and expect from life already, you can look at the CPL games and see it. Those who have and those who want.
those who have and those who want, talking about CPL, just want to share with the rest of Guyana who seem to have invested a lot of emotions into the CPL. Congratulations to the Amazon Warriors, the Guyana Amazon Warriors. I am not a big 2020 person. I'm not a big franchise person in the sense that I don't attach the same kind of
ecstatic joy.
Yes. But you can't miss it. I mean, you
made a point earlier. We can't be deniers.
Yes.
And I think anything positive for the country, we should applaud.
Yes.
That is part of our story. But if you become a denier, you will try to undermine every achievement you make. And that is a bad frame of mind. Because now we're in a position where, as I have said, through happenstance, we now can get better for everybody. So I want the country to look forward to growing Guyana, growing Caribbean, people with a future, people with a culture that will outlast many people who brought us over here as slaves. So we should be grateful to be in this position And I was very happy when you made a point at the very beginning that we should not be deniers, because it denied the reality and the objectivity of the happenstance is, to my mind, foolhardy, because it will win out in the end. People know their objective circumstances are changing. And as people with a strong tradition of critical thinking, we know all change creates paradoxes.
Yeah.
It opens up the opportunities for growth and progress, and it also redistributes the resources and the wealth of the community, even as the change takes place. So we have a struggle to make sure we do a dialectical balance between our capabilities and the fairness that we need to have in the society as a fundamental principle for its development and growth. I think you also made a very important point in your earlier contribution at the beginning too, when we talked about shifting to renewables and the role of technology and all that. Because the historical experience is that no country can truly grow without expanding its technological capability. The single most important factor of production, you would not believe it, is people and their knowledge. Because with what we know, we can invent and innovate. And we can generate the skills to use what we know and invent and innovate. And that is a single, a most important, reliable factor for growth. If somebody were to wipe out American society or any major developed country society overnight by, let's say, the stroke of a pen, what remains as knowledge would mean they don't go back to the dark ages. You start at least three, or at least the 2000 at the beginning. So the knowledge that we have and the knowledge that we store and the capabilities that we have in people and the knowledge and data expansion is the true measure of our capabilities. But if you were to take that same attitude towards that, people may have to go back to where we were when we first settled the country. Because the settled information and the stored knowledge may not be enough to conquer some of the problems that we've already conquered overnight, like how to grow sugarcane. That took a long process. A lot of knowledge is entailed in that. A lot of technical skills are involved. And we therefore have been able to embody in people that technological capability, which means the society can regress ultimately to a pre-sugar type economy, because we knew and know how to grow sugar, and we will always be able to recall or reconstitute it. So the importance of technology and change and the renewables that we have coming should be a central part of what we do. And that is why I think that an investment in renewables should be a primary plank of going forward. Because we need to have that technological capability. And renewables operate on a scale and a level of activity that we can easily afford. You don't have to start with a $14 billion offshore floating platform to be able to look for oil and find oil. But in renewables, you can start in your backyard with sun, with wind, with the biological features of the earth. So the scale of operations is different, and the technological requirements are more affordable for countries like ours. So I think we should generate a capacity like that. And that is why I had, at a certain period of time, I'd written a book called Sugar Threat or Challenge. Because even though we produce sugar as a sweetener, it can produce every single chemical we use on earth, from bombs to lipstick, anything that we can produce can be produced by any chemical that we use now, can be produced by the sugar cane, because you can either use the biomass or you convert the cane into sugar. And sugar is a primary alcohol. And that's the source for almost every other chemical there is on earth. But the capabilities that are the things that I think is important that you mentioned. And I feel they're all linked, and we have a really striking opportunity before us to bring modernity as well as our cultural heritage to build up a new future and a new Guyana and a new Caribbean going forward.
Professor Clive Thomas, laying it out here. Good evening to all of you who are joining us. Good evening, Lynette. Good evening to you. Danette, I see you. Good evening. Good evening. Good evening to you, Carl, and all of you who are joining us on a Monday evening. It's a happy evening, I guess, for us Guyanese. The CPL, as we mentioned a moment ago, Guyana winning, and as I was saying that I'm not a big T20 person, nor do I attach the same kind of the same kind of emphasis and the franchise system and so forth. But as Professor Thomas and I are saying, the people attach a lot of importance to it. They attach a lot of importance to it. Although it's not a Guyana team, there's a certain kind of patriotism that is being attached to it. I mean, I don't, at a personal level, attach the same kind of patriotism, but the masses of people are doing so. And, one cannot deny that Guyanese have put a lot of store in this, to the point where there has developed a kind of rivalry between Guyana and Trinidad. A lot of people are telling me, oh, the Trinidadians don't like it. I don't buy that. I think it's rivalry gone a little bit overboard. Go ahead, CY.
No, I was echoing what you said, because I think it was rivalry gone overboard, because almost all my family live abroad, and they were sending me messages about the fights in various communities between Guyanese and Trinidadians. And I thought, how could people be so invested in the struggle in the cricket field that they want to fight each other at the end of the game?
Yes,
but that shows how seriously something we took it.
Yes. CLR James would have to write. He would have to, in a sense, extend beyond the boundary, the thesis of beyond the boundary. Warrior life today, and to see Trinidadians and Guyanese fighting. He would have had to update beyond the boundary. But it's remarkable stuff. Professor, you introduced us to the subject of renewables and investment in renewables, and that is linked to the timeline, this 2050 that we are projecting, that the transition from fossils to renewables would have been, if not completed, but certainly be in full swing. And your column in last week's Stabrook News, Guyana and the Wider World, examined that, or returned to that subject, and basically tries to answer whether that schedule is still there. Is it 2050, or is it going to be extended to 2070 based on what you are seeing?
Well, maybe I should give a full history of that.
Yes, please do.
One of the most seminal books or studies I've ever read was done by the Energy Information Administration, EIA. And that wanted to project in what decade would there be a transition from fossil fuels to renewables. The study was done sometime, I think, in the 2020s, early 2020, 2019, 2020. And it looked at the primary fuels that are used in every society and calculated. But I don't want to go into their methodology. But they found that by 2050, in the June 2050s, renewables will become more important as a source of primary energy for the world than fossil fuels. And I've always used that as the basis for my own gauging of what would happen. But I'm also conscious that since that date, there's growing skepticism about whether it can be achieved. And that skepticism comes from the sources that reveal that in recent times, there's been extraordinary climate change. You probably hear the news regularly in the States now about the hottest September and the hottest October and the hottest August we've ever had in history in certain parts of the world. And that climate change is significant, and it suggests that the transition period may be shorter. But the study is also seminal to me in that it shows that an argument it can be the end of any fossil fuels. That fossil fuels will remain with us as an important source of fuel. Even when in the 2050s, even when renewables become the primary energy source, fossil fuels will still be growing next year at an alarming rate, 3-4% per annum. So talking about the transition is not talking about the end of fossil fuels. So we have to have a more elastic vision of energy use. And that vision entails recognizing that even though another form of energy might replace fossil fuels, that does not mean the end of fossil fuels. For it to end, it has to be a situation where the people who produce fossil fuels stop producing it. And they will only do so given the cost of labor already sunk in fossil fuels, fall below the marginal cost of their production. And that could stretch on for several centuries because all they have to do is cut the price. Exxon at these present prices are making humongous profit. So and the transition is also taking place. But until the price begins to fall below what they can make a profit from, it means nothing to them in terms of continuing production. They may want to contribute a better world, but economic forces that are behind their investments of the past, because they've already sunk in the industry, will impel them to continue to produce until that marginal cost becomes a loss. And that can take centuries. So the end of fossil fuels is something very different from the growing primacy of renewables. And that separation makes me very skeptical of what is happening. I realize now that many governments are beginning to adopt that recognition. Because I noticed that this week China has clearly announced, because they're the leading user of renewables, that there's no way that the fossil fuel transition can occur by the 2050s.
Here, Professor Thomas, looking at that schedule and raising doubts about whether the transfer can be completed by 2050. You know, in these matters, one cannot always be sure. One makes an assessment based on what is before you. Those of us who are in the social sciences would know that. And that is why it is always important to come back to studies and to take a fresh look given the developments that have occurred. And that's when you know people are serious about what they're doing. You say something today and leave it there and not come back. Look at
I think we should also recognize, David,
yes.
just for the audience that is listening, that if they were to Google predictions of the end of fossil fuels, they'll find several instances where people even predicted the exact date it would end. And that is going back the last 20 years. So there's a wide range of error for anybody attempting to do that. Because to end an industry is not the same thing as to replace it as a primary source of energy. They're two different things. And people, even if as you recognize the growing use of renewables, you have to recognize that fossil fuels will continue. And why it continues? Because Exxon and Chevron and all these people and the Russians and the Saudi Arabians and the UAE and all these places, because they have more investments in oil now than the American oil majors, they own 70% of the oil that's produced. All these places know what is going on. They know that they will have to compete with the renewables. And the best way to compete is to cut price. Because the difference between renewables and that is going to can only win the market if it wins the price war. So that price war is there before us. And the transition is going to take long.
So your argument is that governmental edicts or edicts coming out of institutions like the United Nations will have to contend.
They should be aspirational. No, yes, and therefore they should be aspirational.
Oh, there you go.
So that we have something to work with.
Yeah. So what I want you to do now, Professor, for us is you've laid out the contradictions, as we old-time progressive and Marxists would say. You've laid out
dialectics
and so on. Tell us now, how does Guyana fit into that? Because you have made the argument, on the one hand, that we, countries like Guyana, should not carry the burden of being the policemen and policewomen of climate change, especially...
Not policemen. We should not carry the burden. What I'm saying is that we should adopt the norms, the aspirational norms of the leading institutions. And here I think the leading institution is the UN. And we should work within that framework, because the SDGs and all that have been developed based on that presumption that by the 2050s.
Yeah.
But we should not be lulled into feeling that we should sacrifice our oil, leave it in the ground, as some people recommend, which I believe is the ultimate madness. And they leave the poor people standing.
Right.
We should never substitute oil in the ground for poor people standing.
Right.
And living and breathing in the interior.
Yeah. So on the one hand, you're saying that. On the other hand, you're saying invest in renewables, Guyana. Invest in renewables. All right. So now you're saying that 2050 window may not be closed. It may not be closed in 2050. Now, how do you locate the Guyana that you have, the Guyana within the context of those two factors? We should.
That's why I would argue that my estimate is that we have about 24 billion barrels of oil. And remember, I'm singular in that estimate because other people don't give that figure.
Yeah.
The government has recently given it to the auction, but the Exxon and so forth are still claiming it's only 11 plus billion. So that's like double what they're saying. And I'm saying that we should use that window.
Mm-hmm.
And that oil revenue generated, which I figure will be around, will be somewhere around the late 90s, in the 90s, $100 per barrel
Mm-hmm.
going forward, which will be double what it was in 2020, which is around $50 per barrel. And we should plan on that basis because the
Right.
pressure tells with the renewables, the price will have to start going down to compete. But at the moment, because OPEC is a cartel and it has the capacity to control significant portions of global supply, they can indirectly affect prices to an extent that is also contrary to what the market might want to yield.
Mm-hmm.
And that is why the prices are, as you can see from recent times, edging up. Right now, today, it is over $90, about 92. Prior to that, with the American elections coming and everything, the Biden administration was very concerned that the price might start spiking up, partly because he suspected might be deliberate action on the part of OPEC, which includes Saudi Arabia,
Radio. Right.
they have a big fight, and Russia as the two biggest producers. So that is starting to happen. And he's
So,
locked in because he has ran down the reserves that they were keeping in the US.
right.
The store reserves that he's not been able to fill back the barrels.
Mm-hmm. So, Professor, is it safe to say, or let me put the question to you: should we in Guyana be working with the 2050 agenda, despite the analysis that you gave just now that it may go beyond 2050? But for Guyana, since your argument is that we should take advantage of what oil brings, but we should
Yeah.
also be pivoting and moving towards transition to renewables. Given that,
Yeah.
should we work with the 2050 agenda?
Yeah, that is my recommendation. Yeah.
There you go. That's what a couple of viewers are asking here, whether we should work with the 2050 agenda. Professor, I intended to for us to discuss the second question which you raised in your column this week, but time I don't think will
Next week will do.
Right. So what we'll do is that we will leave that question for next week because I think it's a question that needs that needs in-depth analysis. The question is Guyana locked into ExxonMobil's information warfare on global climate transition policies. We
That's
will
a
leave
very
that.
important. That's a very important question. Yeah.
Very important question. So
Because as I will tell you next week, the difference between Exxon and some of the other companies is that it has been the most aggressive in terms of warfare against climate transition. They've been very aggressive against any preparations for climate transition, and they've scored very badly on all the benchmarks
yeah.
of preparation for the global transition, which is what I identified in that article. And there's also the other fact that I long ago identified Exxon as the single best example of a zombie company that I've ever seen.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, I've done several analyses of that phenomenon in the press and in my Sunday columns. I will, in fact, in the week coming next week,
Next week, we are
raise
going
some
to
of
do
those issues again. Yeah.
yes.
What is
I can't let you go.
zombification?
Yeah. I can't let you go, Professor, without your quick comments on two issues. The first one has to do with the controversy that has arisen over the audit, the identification by a British company of $214 million that Exxon has overbilled and Guyana, and that has mysteriously come down now to $3 million. Yeah. What's going on there from your standpoint as the economist?
Well, I mean, I leave those problems to be sorted out by the government authorities and the auditors. I'm no expert auditor because accounting is not my profession.
Right.
So I think those problems should be solved through that mechanism.
But is there some politics going on there?
I'm sure. People don't like to be caught naked.
There you go. 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 And well, that answers the question, Professor. And of course, the subject of the recent saber-rattling aggression
Venezuela,
by Venezuela. What is happening? Why is Venezuela? Go ahead.
Remember, this oil is that we have found is offshore, and it's going to be contested by Venezuela because they are contesting the boundaries.
Yeah.
So that shows that the risk that we have to carry as a petrol state are formidable. And I told you at the beginning of this discussion, petrol states tend to begin to feel that they're all powerful too, and they don't like people threatening them. So I figured there'd be a period of more aggression and more challenges to our control and access to the offshore oil wells. That's my own feeling.
But let me ask you a practical question, and it goes back to the beginning of this series when we looked at the contract and the government, the previous government signing the contract, and one of the factors you posited was the whole question of Venezuela and getting the American companies in that you speculated that could have been a consideration because you weren't at the table when they were doing the negotiations and signing the contract, and you speculated that the possibility of Venezuelan aggression may have factored in to the deliberations at that time.
Yeah. And also the inclusion of CNOC.
Right.
Right. Remember, they have a Chinese company there too.
A Chinese company too. Right.
So I figured that's why I've written some articles on CNOC and MS. And there's also an American minor.
Right.
Or major, if you want to call it that, but not a multinational, but an oil player of some significance.
Yeah. But given America's, through ExxonMobil, given America's interest in the oil area and presence, wouldn't that deter the Venezuelans from going down the road of the aggression, talking about a referendum and all of that? No? Yes?
I don't think, based on historical experience, I think those challenges will never go away until the world ruling and the world told. We will line up sufficient opinion to support Guyana. It will all be lingering there. Because if we feel that we getting power as a petrol state, remember Venezuela has the largest reserves in the world.
Yeah.
That's something like let me see, I think at least 12 times ours, maybe.
So we're in an interesting neighborhood.
More than Saudi Arabia, more than Russia.
Wow.
More than America.
Lord. Venezuela next door.
Remember the Americans were trying to talk to them?
Yes.
Biden came into power,
When Biden came into power. Yeah, so it's not a straightforward thing where the Americans will.
Well, and in this issue that they have with the border, they've agreed to allow the Venezuelans to be employed
Yeah.
without getting a visa
Yes.
as a condition of entry.
That's right. I mean, 473,000
So,
Venezuelans were granted a temporary status, well, status to work in the
And then
United States.
don't forget to listen. Who was their one was their major employee was also Secretary of State.
Yes. Yes.
At one time, I speculated if Trump didn't have a personal interest in the oil.
In the oil.
Because he would have known what it is.
Yeah. We are in an interesting neighborhood.
In waters where we have to discuss geopolitics at a sensitive level.
Yes.
We can't vote allegations, but we need to discuss that at a sensitive level. And that is what surprises me, that the government makes no effort to ensure that the broader political class in Guyana at least is aware of these issues, bring it to their consciousness, and try to share some consensus on how you would deal with it, because you can't deal with it on a partial basis. It's a challenge to the nation of Guyana. And the challenge which very often given in the history of petro-states ends the war.
Yeah. Professor
Ends
Clive
in violence.
Professor Clive Thomas, again, an interesting program, really touching an issue, starting out with poverty and moving into the transition from fossil fuels to renewable energy and where Guyana stand in all of that, and ending here with geopolitics and the politics in the accounting for the money that comes in. There's never a dull day in Guyana, and there will never be a dull day as Guyana moves steadily into the status of a leading petro state. We shall keep our eyes open and draw on the expertise at our disposal. Professor Thomas, thank you again.
Again, yeah.
Right. And next week we come back. We are going to look at Exxon and its attitude to climate change and what that means for Guyana. Are we locked in? We
could also ask the question, are they trying to lock us in?
There you go.
Which is a hidden question in my question.
That's right. There you go.
Is that a strategy of theirs?
There you go. Professor Thomas, thank you very much. Thank you. And to all of you, thank you again for coming on to Politics 101. Big congratulations again to the Guyanese on clinching after 10-year wait the CPL title. And as I said, I am not a big T20 man. I don't attach a lot of national emotions to the franchises. I don't attach a lot of patriotism to it. But the fact of the matter is that the win came in the name of Guyana, and Guyanese people all over are celebrating. So we celebrate too. Congratulations. And later this week, in fact, on Wednesday and Thursday, there's the Guyana Conference in Washington, organized by Rickford Burke and others. His organization, the CGID. Some of us are going to be there. I just got a note about the panel that I will be on Wednesday. And then on Friday night, at one of the restaurants owned by some Guyanese in Washington, D.C., we'll have a meet and greet organized there by one of our supporters. Kedaki Amsterdam and I will be there to meet people in the Washington, D.C. area, and to probably give an update insofar as we can. You know, it will be an update face to face because we do updates every day. So we are going to be there on that meet and greet, and so it's a hectic week. It's a hectic week coming up. So again, I want to thank you all for being loyal troopers, because remember, this struggle continues. It's not today and then it's done tomorrow. As we gain ground, as we win victories, we turn our attention to challenges. The consequences of almost 300 years, 400 years in bondage are enormous. And the world continues to change around us. And we cannot deny the changes that are occurring around us. And we have to meet those challenges. And we use all of the resources at our disposal. And as Clive Thomas and others have always reminded us, no great transformation has ever taken place in the human experience without ideas. Ideas. Ideas itself is reflected in practice, and practice itself influences ideas. And so it's not one or the other, but both. And we continue to do both here. We continue to generate ideas, discuss ideas, open up ideas, all in the service of the struggle. We are at a particular moment, and this moment demands that we adapt the struggle to the moment. The struggle is continuous. The struggle continues. But this moment, you all heard at the end of the program what Thomas tell us? Venezuela got the world's largest reserves of oil. Guyana got one of the largest discoveries, if not the largest discoveries in recent time. We live in an interesting neighborhood, and we can't continue to do our politics and our economics as if that is not real. What the young people are saying now, get woke. Woke. We're in the big, we've always been there geopolitically. Always. Slavery itself was a global phenomenon. Colonialism itself, it meant that we were growing up as a society as part of an empire. So we've always been global in terms of the reach. And that globalism now takes a particular face because that globalism is happening at a particular time. And we are part of this now, not as a colony, not as a slave state, but at least theoretically as an independent country. The University of Guyana, I think on the 29th, whatever date is the 29th, the University of Guyana is holding a symposium on Forbes Burnham. Please, you all go down there. Whatever you all think about Burnham, this is not the time to be poisoning each other, but it's the time to try to understand. That is, those of you who come at Burnham from the left or from the right or from the center, the more we learn about Burnham and what he did in the larger framework of Guyana, where it's his role in expanding the authoritarian state that we inherited from colonialism, his role in terms of trying to tackle poverty within the first decade of independence, his role in navigating the geopolitics of the Cold War, All of that, you can't talk about Burnham as in a one-dimensional way. It's going to be a mistake. So we hope that that symposium will at least look at Burnham in its larger dimension. I say to my Burnhamite friends, when you all confine Burnham just to the bridge that he built over the Demerara River or the multilateral schools, you are diminishing your own leader. And I say to those who confine Burnham to the rise of the authoritarian state in the periphery, to quote Clive Thomas, in the post-colonial era, and the excesses that came with that, including political assassination, those of us who confine him just to that, we are doing our own case a disservice. As you move further and further away from the theater of history, you have a chance to put a wider gaze. Wider gaze. So that symposium at the University of Guyana on Burnham is on the 29th. Tomorrow night I don't have the flyer in front of me, but tomorrow night I'm going to give you all some more details on that. Until then, you all be good to yourself, and of course, continue the love. The love. Remember, our watchword here is love and what? Eradication of poverty. Shadow said poverty is hell. Even or ask, how come we are independent and the poverty continues? We're moving on. We're moving on. We're moving on.
One race from the same place that make the same trip on the same ship. So we must push one common intention. It's for a better life in the region. For we women and we children. That must be the ambition of the Caribbean and the Caribbean and the